Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nugentino Cinema. And today I'm here again with Kay. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. We're here to review Waking Life, which is a film directed by Richard Linklater from 2001. And this was one of your favorite films. I think it was in your top 100, right?
Yeah, it is in my top 100, and it's one of my favorite Linklater films in general. It's very special to me. I'm glad we're talking about it today.
Yeah. I actually hadn't seen it, even though I'm a big fan of Richard Linklater. But this was actually I've only got two movies of his left. It's Tape and The Newton Boys, which are all very underseen movies. But I hadn't seen this, and this is one I hear talked about a lot. So I don't know why it was like one of the last ones I saw, but I really liked it.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen the two that you mentioned. I was like racking my brain, like, have I seen that? But I don't think so.
Mm,
I've seen the classics, and I own a lot of his stuff on Blue as well. But
mm.
yeah, I have some catching up to do too, so you're not alone.
Yeah, tell me about your first time watching this movie. How did you first come across it?
Yeah, I came across this a number of years ago. I'd already been introduced to Linklater,
Mm,
like his films, and I think I'd seen, Dazed and Confused. I had maybe seen Slacker. I think that was the first one that I saw. And so I sought this one out myself just out of curiosity. And it's the kind of thing that like the kind of conversations they have in this movie just like turn my brain on.
yeah,
I love it, and so it quickly became a favorite of mine that I've revisited a few times since then. I think on Letterboxd I've maybe only logged it 2 or 3 times, but I've seen it more than that before
yeah.
Letterboxd. So yeah, I guess I just picked it from his catalog because I thought it would be interesting, and it really clicked with me. Yeah.
Yeah, it hits on a lot of sweet spots of mine. I really well, one, Slacker is my favorite film of his. And
Mm.
that movie is very loose and doesn't have a strong narrative. It's just sort of exploring this subculture in this area in Austin and just having a lot of philosophical conversations. But this seems like an extension of that. And but with a more specific theme, which is sort of exploring your dreams and exploring a lot of these philosophical conversations, but also doing the animation thing, which was the first time he did that. But he did it again with Skinner Darkly, and then most recently with Apollo 10 and a half. So it was interesting to see that where it began, and it was his most popular, I think, film that did that. But yeah, I really liked it. I mean, it was really good. I probably place it among my favorites of his. The only ones I put above it are Slacker and then Dazed and Confused, but it's right up there for me.
So we actually have that in common then, because Slacker I think is my favorite Linklater film. It's like comfort food to me. I don't know how many times I've seen it, but I would guess at least 8 or 9, if not more. I would just pop it on if I'm like sick or something. It's one of my favorites because it's so meandering. You can kind of just
Mhm.
hop in and out. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I feel like there are a lot of overlaps and similarities between Waking Life and Slacker,
Mhm.
visually and in terms of like themes. But yeah, many of his films do have that kind of like along for the ride, meandering quality. And what stood out to me most as being the connection between the two near the beginning is Slacker opens with him on the bus, like kind of waking up from a dream, or he's reading, or I think he was dreaming because he
Mhm.
talks to the cab driver about his dream. But in this one, they have the scene of him on a train, and then he's in the train station, and it's kind of very similar. And it makes me kind of wonder. I mean, obviously there's intentionality in that, but it makes me kind of wonder like how much he wanted those two to be connected and why. Um, I don't know. Were there any things that stood out to you as being overlaps in that way?
Well, that for sure. I definitely was thinking the same thing with him on the train, and then even the way it cuts to him in the car with the two people that he's hitchhiking with or getting a ride from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in Slacker, he's on. It starts with Richard Linklater, who's the director, but he's acting in Slacker. He's on the bus, and then he gets a ride with this taxi driver, and he's doing these philosophical conversations with the taxi driver. But in this, it's the main character's on a train and then he gets a ride with these people and then the guy talking to him. Well, there's the guy driving the boat car, but then the other guy, the guy that drops him off like on the street that he chooses, is Richard Linklater. So it seems like a sort of passing of the torch, if you know what I mean. Like he's like in the first movie he was giving his own ideas, and now he's like passing these ideas on to somebody else. That's kind of what I got from it. But yeah, I think they're definitely connected.
Yeah, I like that take. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I feel like there's even a point near the end where he, I wish I'd written it down. I actually did write down a couple of things that popped to my head while I was watching it. But there's a part near the end, I think, where he's talking about like pitching something to have to do with dreams, or how it was like the most experimental or the most, I don't know, there was something about it being difficult to pitch. And so part of me was like, I wonder if this is more in line with what he wanted to make earlier on, but then ended up making Slacker instead. And maybe they're like, I wonder how much they're supposed to be like companion pieces in a way, because I feel like they do fit together really well. Like Slacker followed by Waking Life would be a great Linklater double feature.
Yeah, for sure.
If you just want to like totally steep your brain in heady, loose philosophy. But yeah, a lot of his films are that way too, though, with the way that they just kind of, the flow of them is very similar. I mean, like you even look at something like Dazed and Confused that we've mentioned, and it just kind of flows throughout the course of a day. So I like that, especially here, because it feels like a dream where you're kind of shifting from place to place, but it also feels like a train of thought and how it kind of shifts and changes over time too. The animation, of course, tying into that really well, and making it very interpretive and obviously dreamlike. But I forgot where I was going with that exactly. But yeah, his films all have that sort of like just following the stream of consciousness sort of feeling, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And in terms of them being connected, like I think he does that with a lot of his movies. Like Dazed and Confused, like kind of leads into Everybody Wants Some, which he did recently, and that's connected. But then also he has the Before trilogy. There's the Before Midnight, or Before Sunrise, Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Midnight, which all span like 20 years. And then he has it almost feels like a trilogy in itself, which is like Waking Life, and then A Scanner Darkly, and then most recently Apollo 10.5. But it seems like he's definitely exploring different ideas throughout his career, or the same ideas, I mean, but like in different ways. But yeah. Really cool.
You even see that, I mean, I don't think that Boyhood is connected necessarily to his other films, but there is also that sort of like following on a more macro scale, you know, the trajectory of a person's life, thoughts, being, etc. So rather than a course of a day, it's the course of many of their years. So yeah, I've always really appreciated that about his films, just how, I don't know, he deals with some very like cerebral things, but he grounds them so well in just walking around your neighborhood, and the people are so, I don't know, they're so unique, but very like people you would run into on the street. Like his characters just feel so, I don't know, like alive in a certain way. Like they don't feel staged, even in his scripted stuff, which I guess all of it is scripted, but you know what I mean. It just feels, it feels like there's, he makes his subjects very approachable by using these familiar sorts of people and places. And yeah, I just really like his films and the things he explores, and I'm being a bit redundant, but the way he explores them. Yeah, he's one of my favorite directors, I would say. Definitely like top 5.
Yeah, and the way he like gets these certain characters into films, like I think a lot of directors, because they're very loose, they don't have a lot of narrative. I don't know how much is improvised. I think a lot of it is scripted, but I think there is still improvisation there. But he manages to like always keep them very interesting and captivating. And there's never a second where like I'm bored by these people. It's never really a problem. So I'm definitely like impressed by that. And just because if I think about the standard like what a film is supposed to be. Like a film is supposed to have like conflict and it's supposed to have this certain structure. Like some of his films fit in that, but like this one definitely does it, and like Slacker doesn't. But I wish there was more films like that. I wish there was more like sort of narrativeless films, and they even sort of cover that in the movie when they're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the holy moment, and they have this like scene in the theater, which is one of my favorite moments of the movie. That was in the moment I really like was like loving it. But yeah, they talk about how like film is sort of like because of like what was created in Hollywood, like film has been seen as like what's better explored in literature. It's seen as like it should be a story, like a very clear, clean story, when that maybe more belongs in literature. But what film can do is more conducive to like dreams or this sort of like loose narrative. And I wish there was more movies like that. I feel like there's some, but like I wish it was something that was experimented with a lot more. And so it's really cool to see anytime I see something like this. Like I don't know. I really responded to it and I thought it was really good. But that's something I've done with other like I responded really well to Slacker. I mean, and so I'm not surprised I love this, but I don't know why it took so long to see it.
Yeah, I was going to say because you're in Texas too, so I wonder how much of it gets a hometown bump. Not from the same town. I think you're from a different city, but
Mhm.
the Texas vibe, does it come through?
Yeah, I was gonna say like there is a cool element of like him because a lot of his movies are in Austin. I'm pretty sure this is like a lot of it's shot in Austin, and I've been there. It's about 3 hours from where I live, but yeah, there's definitely a cool element of him exploring that area. And he technically is from Houston. He was born in Houston, and
Oh,
that's where I'm
nice.
from. Yeah, and a lot of Boyhood is shot in Houston, and then Napolitan and a Half, which just came out this year, was it was shot. It takes place in Houston, well, even more closely to where I live exactly, because like I sort of live in a suburb of Houston. Like right now, I'm in Kemah, but like that's close to like Clear Lake, which is like where Apollo 10 and a half kind of takes place. And it's about like the 60s, like when like NASA was first starting and the moon landing, or they were first sending astronauts to the moon and whatnot. But NASA's right here. Like NASA's in like Seabrook, which is like, you know, 10 minutes away. It's all in this area. So that was really cool to see. But yeah, he
Hometown
definitely has like a
hero.
local thing. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm curious, not to put you too much on the spot, but kind of looping back to what you were saying about movies that aren't necessarily beholden to narrative. Are there any outside of Linklater's filmography that's jumped to mind? It's okay if there aren't any, because I'm struggling to think of some off the top of my head, and I'm blanking.
There's a few for sure. Like Gummo by Harmony Korine is one, like a big one. That doesn't have like any real narrative at all. But there's definitely like a lot of ideas there. Like it follows like certain characters, so there's that at least. You can at least like stick with these characters.
Mm.
But that's one of my favorite films of all time. And Trash Humpers. I mean, that's not one of my favorite films, but it's still interesting. It's by the same director, Harmony Korine. That doesn't have any real narrative. Um, Robert Altman, like Three Women, it has like a narrative kind of, I guess, but it's still pretty loose and experimental. That one's really good. I'm trying to think. Those are the three that come to mind, but there's a lot more than that. I mean, even like David Lynch, like Inland Empire, like that doesn't have like a traditional narrative. I think a lot of his movies do have a narrative, but that one doesn't. Like that one, he kind of like lets loose and just does whatever he wants. But yeah, I'd have to think about it. But those are a few that come to mind.
Lynch off the leash, huh? That's actually one of the few Lynch films I've yet to see. You successfully listed 4 films I have not seen, so I can't comment on any of that except to say that they will move up in my watch list. And actually, after our Altman, I don't know if you want to call it a conversation or debate because it wasn't really either. Um,
Yeah.
um, when we were chatting about Altman, I actually had Three Women recommended to me because his filmography is a huge blind spot for me
Mhm.
that I desperately need to fix. But I just
Yeah.
keep watching vampire movies, Drew.
Nice.
But yeah, just kind of going back though, you mentioned that the piece about, well, what got this whole train started, that being your favorite segment of the film, I think my favorite segment was the part where he's speaking with a woman about language, and that stuff like really just lights me up, because I think about that kind of thing a lot, and I loved the way that they kind of illustrated like the word love. Like I will say it, and it can be interpreted billions of different ways, just depending on your personal experiences with that, and like the context of it. And so I love that. I love how loose all of the ideas are. I don't agree with all of the statements or ideas in the film, but I like the way that they, like I said, just kind of light me up and make me want to think more about that. I think that's what makes this film so rewatchable too, is, and what makes any good film rewatchable is that you go back to it and it gives you something a little bit different each time. It'll stay the same, but the way that you interpret it changes depending on where you're coming from. And this one, like, while it's these same ideas, and again, I don't always agree with them, I feel like I gain so much from each watch, just depending on where I'm at in my life. But yeah, language especially, that is something I think about quite frequently, and I'm so glad they brought it up because they articulate it so well in the film. It's beautiful. I have a whole little page of notes, but that's probably the biggest one because I like that piece so much.
Yeah, that's a good one. And like I thought, like how she talks about how like words being inert and sort of just these symbols, but what makes them important or what makes them significant is how we are like emotionally responding to them, because it can be, we can respond to love because of our own, need for it, or our own lack of love. It can go in any sort of different direction depending on whoever's experience. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff with that. It almost feels like one thing I thought was cool about the movie in general is it feels like it interviews, almost like he's like interviewing these people about their own philosophical ideas, but he sort of weaves them together into this sort of structure of like a semi-fictional movie. It almost at the end it more sort of came together as like something that had a story, sort of. But because I started to question, like, because there was the whole idea of him being dropped off at the beginning, and then he gets hit by the car, and then he wakes up, but then at the end he meets the Richard Linklater character again, and he's like I'm starting to feel like I'm dead. And then the guy like says like wake up, and then he like kind of drifts off into space. But so I was kind of questioning, like, has he been dead this whole time? Has it been like a sort of like death dream? But yeah, I don't know. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because that's how I've always interpreted it, especially because they have this segment where they talk about how the brain can stay active for, what was it, 6 to 12 minutes after death, obviously depending on the circumstance of your death. So I kind of felt like it was alluding to it being that, especially with the way that he can't wake up. Like there comes a point where he understands the concept of lucid dreaming and is explained a little bit, like it's explained a little bit how that works, and he realizes that he's in a dream or dreamlike state when he does the light switch, but even when he's aware that he's lucid dreaming, he doesn't really seem to have control over what's happening. Like he just kind of continues to shift and flow with these different people, but he can't wake up. And so that is what makes me think that he is dead. And that actually ties in to a larger thing that I really appreciate about the film, which is just like the human desire to always be like searching for something. And I love this idea that like even in the last few minutes of your life that your brain is active, the idea that like even in those last few minutes you're still trying to figure it out, like you're still searching for meaning. And so it's like it's just this very, I don't even really know how to encapsulate my thoughts well, but I just love that like the whole thing is just marveling at searching and trying to find an answer and finding answers in different ways depending on who you are. interpreting it however you like a word. And it means different things, but it's all the same. And then this idea of like collective memory and searching through that for meaning. But specifically that thing of him potentially, depending on how you like to interpret it, being dead, and the last few minutes of his life being this existential sussing out of what his life meant. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. No, I thought it was great. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that makes sense. That's how I see the movie. Like, I think it is like some sort of like existential journey, like right before you die. But yeah, I mean, I love the scenes with Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke, that's sort of a weird like transition between the before films, and they're like in this film talking about a lot of that stuff, like the idea of like your life going on even when you're dead, like even if like your brain is only active for like 6 minutes, but that could be a lifetime within like dream time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a few films I've seen that are like sort of about dreams, and that's a subject I'm very interested in. But this is definitely one of the best. The only other one I can think of that I love more is Mulholland Drive. But yeah, this is up there.
Yeah, for me, I think a dream film I would put higher is Akira Kurosawa's Dreams. I don't know if it's necessarily in the same vein because it's just like vignettes that are supposed to be like dreams, but that's probably my favorite like dream movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole segment is great too because near the beginning of their conversation when they're laying in bed, they talk about how she sometimes views her life from the perspective of an old woman who is about to die, and like the moment that she's living is actually a memory. And that's something that stood out to me, one of the maybe the first, I can't say for sure, but like early on in my viewings of this movie, like I really clung on to that because I felt that way a lot too. Like I'll sometimes be experiencing something and be like, this feels, it's almost like a surreal or like not deja vu, but like there's something about it that feels like separate from other memories. And I don't know, it feels like watching myself, like a third party kind of thing, even though I'm actively doing it. It's so strange. And this film articulates so many of those difficult feelings that's hard to convey, sometimes even struggling to do it itself. And I appreciate that it like gives space to be a little bit awkward and a little bit funny, sometimes very angry and aggressive. But like at the awkward point, like the part where they're talking about holy moments and he's like, should this be a holy moment? Let's just sit here. And that kind of stuff where it's like a little bit cheesy almost, where you're like, oh, every moment is a holy moment. But if you can just let it be what it is, it's like very impactful. But yeah, there's just like such a freedom to dig into these different ideas that I love. I'm going off on a lot of tangents. You're going to have to rein me in a little bit.
Oh, no problem.
But yeah, that feeling of kind of watching your life happen and understanding that the moment is just that. And from that moment on, it's only going to be a memory, and understanding your life as like the formation of memories rather than like, I don't know, it's both. It's
What's so weird, like once you live your whole life, like it's all just these little fragmented pieces, and like it almost is like a dream. Like if you think of whenever you dream, it's just like these like little moments like strung together, and then like at the end of your life, not that I'm not in my life and I would know, but like just looking back on the past, like it is these like cobbled together things, and like it sort of gets like more loose and loose, and then you start to question like how much you really remember, and like it is weird like that, but. Definitely in terms of like the disassociation, like that Julie Delpy was talking about, like about her thinking that she's like this old woman. Like I've sort of felt that same thing in certain ways. Like I've had like certain moments where I'm thinking like I could like be in purgatory right now. Like maybe I'm already dead. But I don't know. That's just sort of like weird thoughts I've had. But yeah, I mean a lot of the stuff I definitely relate to. I have a very active like dream life, for lack of a better term. Like I dream a lot, and and that's part of why I'm so interested in dreams, I think.
Have you ever lucid dreamed?
I think kind of like it's not like strongly like I can't like strongly control it, but there's like been times where I've like been aware that I'm dreaming like occasionally.
Huh.
Hmm.
Check the light switches.
I haven't done that. The only thing I think I've done is like because the classic thing is like pinch yourself.
Oh, sure.
I think I've tried to like pinch myself in a dream, and then like I feel like nothing, and then I realize I'm dreaming. But yeah. Do you dream a lot?
I sometimes, yeah. I think my most active period of dreaming was during COVID lockdown.
Mhm.
And it was so I was I'll not go down that trail too much, but it was basically just to the point where I would look forward to going to sleep because
Yeah.
I would look forward to dreaming. And so I remember sometimes I'd be like, oh, good, I'm getting tired. Like maybe I can go take a nap or go to bed and I'll have a dream.
Yeah.
So a little peek at my COVID experience, but also I think that was when I was dreaming the most. Most of the time, I don't know, like every once in a while, maybe
Hmm.
like a couple times a week. But it's definitely not super frequent. I wish it was. I like
Yeah.
dreaming. It's always really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I've
Yeah.
heard the theory that everyone dreams all the time, constantly. It's just that when you wake up, you can't remember it.
Right.
And I don't remember the majority of my dreams, but it's just that like I pick up on like a little bit at the very end, and I'm
Mm.
aware that I was dreaming, but then that like kind of fades away. But yeah, I had a dream last night about like actually last night I was dreaming about like for some reason I was driving to Austin, which
Hmm.
is like sort of connects to this because the movie took place in Austin.
Hmm.
But I don't know. Anyway,
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, I always love hearing people's dreams. I know it's like a whole cliche thing of like, oh, let me tell you my dream, and you're supposed to be like exhausted and exasperated and like, I guess I'll listen. But I actually love that stuff. I'll be like, tell me what you dreamed. Tell me as much as you can remember. But I don't know. I just think that kind of like, I don't know. It's like there's no limits. You can dream whatever you want. And so I always think it's interesting to see kind of like what film your brain has come up with that night.
yeah.
um, yeah, were there any other segments that really stood out to you or that you feel like gripped you in any way?
Like, well, one thing I wanted to bring up is like certain moments felt like strange in terms of how dark they were. Like, not like more than other Linklater films I had seen. Like the one
Yeah.
moment where the guy like lights himself on fire was pretty
Mm-hmm.
dark, but also it had this weird tone. Like the music was very like light, and it was almost like it's supposed to be kind of like absurd, I think. But
Yeah.
and the same with the other moment where the guy's talking about they're at a bar and he's talking about this guy like charging at him with a knife and then he shoots him and then the guy he pulls out a gun. He's like, I haven't used this gun in a long time. The bartender and he's like, I don't even know if it would work. And the bartender's like, why don't you pull the trigger and find out? And he shoots him, and then the bartender shoots that guy. And it was sort of weirdly like graphic, or at least in terms of
Yeah.
like not in terms of any movie I've seen before, but just in terms of like Linklater's films. I haven't seen a lot of stuff like that, but it all felt sort of like weird and absurd and sort of still fitting in with a dream thing, like in terms of that your dreams can go in any sort of direction, I think. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it does get it does get very dark that way. Yeah, like they're like in that instance of at the bar, like you see the guy basically like bleeding out, and
Yeah.
that's the end of the shot, and you're like, wow. But the whole conversation up to that point was like, yeah, really dark too, because he's talking about how the guy like was like covered in blood and yeah, and then the guy setting himself on fire, which was obviously like a, call back to the monks who set themselves on fire
Mhm.
during the Vietnam War as protest. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. But what was especially interesting to me about that segment of the guy with self-immolation was off to the side of the shot, there's a couple, and they're watching it as it happens, and they stand
Mhm.
there for a minute and watch him burning. And then, like, just very briefly, you see one of the figures go, and then they walk away, and I was just like, wow, like it's so, because the whole thing is about like not having a voice and not being seen. And so I thought it was just kind of like a dark sort of irony even in that like this guy does this whole thing, makes this whole speech, and at the end everybody's like, All right, well, I'm going to go on with my day. Like, even in that, he couldn't be heard.
That's
But I think it
interesting.
also ties into, like, oh, sorry.
Or no, I was just gonna say that like it's interesting. I didn't notice him shrugging before. I noticed him watching the guy, but I didn't notice him shrugging. So that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's like right before they cut to the next part, like they're watching them. Because I remember just being curious about like how they would react. Like, because if I were Linklater, I would think it would be very interesting to have them, stand and watch or take some other like action to do something. But the fact that they just walk away just serves the point even more. So that's why I'm not the director. um, but yeah, and then there's the parts where he showcases like the aggressive side of it, like the frankly like very angry side. There's the guy who's in a prison cell and is basically talking about all of the ways that he wants to torture people, whether
Yeah, that was
it's
another
with
dark
like
moment I forgot to
hot
mention.
iron in
Yeah,
various orifices, things like that.
yeah.
But what's funny about that too is like with the way it ties in with the animation, like they color him like very like he's bright red, like very aggressively red, and he's like walking around
Hmm.
with a cigarette and like I'm gonna fuck you guys up.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you noticed this in the credits or in the film itself, but Alex Jones is in this movie.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was the other ranting, raving fellow, as
And then he
you
changes
may
color
guess.
too, like as he gets angrier and angrier, he gets more and more red. But
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually a tie-in with Slacker as well, because that has a scene of a fellow in his car with a, um,
oh, like the mic and the like speakers on top of the car.
yeah, I forget what it's called, but that kind of like sound system.
Hmm.
So there was a tie-in with that too. But yeah, he's just kind of going off, and so it's funny to think like that's 2001, and now we're here in 2022, and just like,
Yeah.
wow.
Well, Alex Jones also had a cameo in Scanner Darkly,
Oh
which
wow.
yeah, he got like tased by like some government people while he's like standing on the street, like ranting about something. But um, yeah, but it's interesting to see him back then, where I think he was kind of seen as like a kind of a harmless, like crazy kook, but now he's like much more in the media and much more like known as being on trial and all this stuff. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of that was like he was he's from Austin and like he's big in Austin. So I mean Richard Linklater's from Austin. He was sort of known in that scene as just a weird, interesting guy. But unfortunately, it's taken like a darker turn for him. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching that when I rewatched it for this conversation because I'd forgotten that he was in this, and so I was like, oh, like I had a moment. I was like, oh, it's
Yeah.
Alex. It took me
Yeah.
a bit by surprise. Did not expect to see him while I'm like vibing and like, oh, what is it? What does life mean? And what are words? And then just like,
Mhm.
oh, it's Alex Jones too. He's here. Um, but yeah, I also wonder if you ever like explore these kinds of concepts and ideas, these sort of like big question type things, like outside of film or in other films, or is this stuff that you like that word wiggles around in your brain pretty often?
That's definitely stuff I think about. I talk about with like friends and stuff like that.
Mm,
Just about dreams, and I think just the other day I was talking about the idea of dreams being real, or like what makes them any more, what makes our life more real than the dreams that I have.
mm,
Like, but I mean, in a sense, like my life is more real because I can feel things. You can sort of feel things in dreams if you go like deep enough, but like you have more choice in life. Like you can choose to make things happen, but in dreams, unless you're like some extremely skilled lucid dreamer, it's sort of like just random. You never know what's going to come next. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. And I was also thinking about how, I mean, just to get honest with everybody, I've had like a fear of going blind. And I was thinking, if you were completely blind, like even if you had no eyes at all, if you lost your eyes somehow, you would still dream. Like you would still dream exactly the same as you've always dreamed, and you would still see everything. Because my dreams are pretty vivid sometimes. I can see things, and you would still, because so say I lost my eyes like tomorrow, I would still see everything the same way because I've already gained that much like intel in terms of seeing. You know what I mean? Like I've already like
Right.
gained all that data. Not everything, but I'm just saying like I've gained enough that I can build visual dreams. But it's just weird that your brain can create this whole like dreamscape, I guess, for lack of a better term, where you can see things in your mind. I don't know. It just kind of blows me away sometimes to think about.
Yeah, like a catalog of places and people and things that you can just use to create these different like scenes in your head.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, it boggles my mind too. I always am a little bit, I don't know, perturbed is the first word that comes to mind when I have a dream and I feel very specifically in the dream that a figure is a certain person or something like that. But then I'll wake up and be like, I can't remember what they looked like or what they sounded like or how they moved. And that ties into the animation style of this film. But yeah, it kind of amazes me too because even though we do have these extensive catalogs of things like visual information to create dreams from, like even in that, there's so much like nebulous. I don't know. It's never quite what it is anyway.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. Like, yeah, even if you hadn't ever seen things in the way that you would typically describe seeing something, whether it's fragmented or lost light eyesight, you still have these manifestations of your life that you're trying to work out.
Mhm.
Yeah, wild. It does make me wonder, like how, I mean, people are like, what does my dog dream about and stuff like that. But I sometimes wonder, like, what little kids dream about, or like babies, or people who don't have that extensive catalog that you've talked about, like
Mhm.
visual information. Um, yeah, always wild.
I think dogs dream about like it's weird because they don't have language, so it's like a
Yeah,
different sort of sense in that term. But I still think because they can see, they'll like visually like I've seen my dog and I don't know for sure what she's dreaming about, but like I've seen her like laying there and she's like kind of like barking and she's like oh and like shaking her legs and like it
yeah,
seems like
like
she's like
twitching.
yeah she's like running. I'm just imagining that she's like because my dog like, she always when she goes to the backyard she like runs to the gate and like there's like another dog on that side and they bark at each other. So I was just imagining like they're like she imagines she's running to the gate and barking at this dog in her dream.
She's dreaming about her friend. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. I
Oh,
definitely think they dream of visual stuff. Like I don't know for sure, obviously, but I mean I get a strong sense that they do like visually see things in their dreams.
yeah, I'm sure.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's I feel like we've already talked for a while, but there's so much that could be unpacked. Like I feel like we could have a whole conversation about every conversation in the film in a way. Like
Hmm.
it would kind of be a cool one to sit and watch in person with friends and just like chit chat about after. I did watch this earlier today, actually just a few hours ago. So it's still pretty fresh. But even now, I'm like kind of starting to forget pieces. I'm like, yeah, that like I'm looking at my notes and I'm like, oh, what was I trying to say? Um, but yeah, part of why I brought up whether you think about this stuff outside of the context of this film, is I've been on a little bit of an Alan Watts kick recently. Are you familiar with
Hmm.
him?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so he kind of interpreted and recontextualized Eastern philosophy for a Western audience.
Hmm.
He's referenced in like Her when they're talking about like big heady stuff around technology and the meaning of life. So a lot of his stuff is like it's spiritual, but it's very grounded. And I've been binging his stuff as I've been in a little bit of a music rut lately. And a lot of the things that came up in the film are things that he's been talking about in the lectures I've been listening to. So it was a really interesting tie-in for me there as well. If you don't mind my going on a bit of a tangent here, there
Oh, go
was a
ahead.
piece, thank you, there was a piece in the film where they're talking about, I'm trying to remember what segment it was exactly, but they're talking about like destruction and how there's no way. I think it was the self-immolation guy actually, and he's talking about how there's no way to avoid destruction. Like destruction is. Do you know what I'm talking about? What segment? I wish I'd written it down more like verbatim.
I'm not sure exactly for some reason.
But
yeah,
it
sounds familiar.
It was something. It was definitely like about destruction of society and like evil and wickedness and all this stuff, and how we can't live without it, but we can't live with it. And that's something where it had come up in an Alan Watts chat lecture I was listening to, and he was talking about like the qualities of yin and yang and how like you have to have the positive and the negative and stuff. So it was really interesting for me to bring that into this viewing and kind of have this like wider contextualization for that segment and others. And just like how it made me think about how many different people have thought about things like this and how we're still kind of no closer. And then it ties in again to like the conversation about language and how like it all is just finding your own meaning in it, whether it's like finding the beauty in destruction or finding the beauty in birth and life, and however you want to interpret it. I did lose my train of thought a little bit along the way there, but the general concept is just, it's interesting. It's there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer, but there's like the collective question. I don't know.
It's like we're kind of hitting on something bigger. We're kind of like hitting on something bigger that we never quite like. We get there, but we never quite go like past it. We never really solve it. I think one guy, it was like an old man, who's talking about how we have like so many or so few geniuses. Like he was talking about like Nietzsche or like various people, but 99% of the people are just the average person, and we're just sort of like hitting at zeros, I guess, like in terms of like a code, like just zeros over and over again. But we're at this higher level, but we're never sort of going forward. Like he was saying, like the Greeks 3,000 years ago were just as advanced as we were in like sort of some stuff like that. But I still think it's interesting. I don't know how much I do. Part of me feels like we are more advanced than that. I mean, I'm not saying we're super more advanced than that, but just like a little bit. But I don't know. But there's definitely some interesting ideas there. But in terms of the yin and the yang, I have my two tattoos that I have are sort of yin and yang centric.
Oh,
sort
really?
of like in terms of like balancing like the negative and the positive. Because I feel like, I don't know, that's like a core to life in my eyes.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other. And in fact, you actually just kind of hit on it with like zeros and ones. Like you have to have one to contextualize the other. Like if you don't have a negative, then there's nothing. And if you don't have a positive, then there's nothing. Like reality exists in the contrast. Like you have to have one in order to understand the other. So yeah, it's this makes me want to ask, and I know again this is like a big broad question, but do you have like a life philosophy? And if you do, did you see any elements of it reflected in the conversations in this film?
I don't have a strong like life philosophy. Like I'm still questioning a lot of things, but like I'm only like, I guess all I would say is I'm like agnostic. Like I think there could be something out there, but I don't think it's any sort of God that like is in the Christian sense or even the Buddhist sense or whatever. It's any sort of written down religion. I just think there could be something, because I can't see why our existence would be like just completely random. But at the same point, I don't think we're smart enough to know exactly what it is. So, or like just any human is. So I don't necessarily think that any written religion is real. I think we're searching for meaning, and that's what that is. But like, I sort of more lean towards the fact that like when we die, I kind of feel like nothing's gonna happen. but I still think there could be some greater meaning out there, and I'm still open to the fact that I could be completely wrong. It's just that I don't necessarily think that any written religion is like has God in it so far. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I agree with a lot of that. I was raised in a religious environment. And so I identified with a lot of that for a significant part of my life. Excuse me. But it's definitely changed over time just because as we all grow, we're faced with these daunting, unanswerable questions.
Yeah.
And it makes you kind of look in on yourself and try to suss out what's true. I think for me, I've always definitely clung to like nature and that element of being alive. Um, I do think it's random and chance that we're here, to be honest. The way that, it's random and chance that frogs are here, or dogs, or flowers, or anything. And so for me, it's, and I think this kind of ties into what I was saying before about like there's no 100% correct answer for everybody. There's no singular meaning aside from just being the most fulfilled and dynamic version of yourself that you can be. Like a flower doesn't have a meaning in life aside from being a flower, right? And so its purpose is just to like bloom as beautifully as it can and gain as much light as it can and hopefully pollinate or reproduce itself, and then it dies and then it's nothing. But it doesn't mean that there wasn't significance to its life and what it was. So like that's kind of how I approach things, which is just like, how can I be the fullest version of myself and hopefully like encourage other people to do that and like propagate that.
Yeah.
But I really love learning about various religions and how people interpret that, because I feel like that is a core part of so many religions, which is just like be the best you can be for whether it's for a higher being or like for your community. But yeah, it ties into the film in bits and pieces, but I think just the overall thing is like these questions are, I don't think, meant to be answered collectively. I think they are collective questions that we have to answer individually, depending on what means what to us. So I don't know. It's just I guess I didn't really have a way to wrap up that train of thought, but I was curious what you would say.
No, I sort of agree. Like I feel the same way about like us having the same meaning as like animals. Like I feel the same way. I don't think we have any. I think we've evolved past dogs or whatever animal may be out there.
I am smarter than most dogs.
But like, I think that we are still basically on the same track as they are. Like we don't have any sort of higher purpose than they have. I mean. And but I just feel that there could be not somebody, but something out there that like the same way we've created code and we've created like AI and all this stuff, there could be something higher that created that for us. Like we could be I mean basically the same thing as like simulation theory. We could be part of like some sort of weird simulation is all I feel. And not to say, because like I've heard a lot about simulation theory, like are we in a computer? But like whenever I hear that, my first thought is just like it's God's computer. It's like some computer that we can't even fathom. But it's not necessarily God. When I say God, I don't mean like it's the Christian God or whatever. It's just some sort of higher power. That's what I see, or that's what I think. It could be that. It could be some sort of weird simulation that we're in.
I love that. There's like so much comfort in that. Just the idea of it being for and about something, even if we're just in a dream and we're the dream character helping somebody figure out that they're in a dream. Like the guy who was, when he asked the woman and he's like, what is it like to be a character in a dream? And, you never really realize or recognize. But yeah, the idea of it being for something or have been created for a purpose, even if it's become askew from that, is I love and appreciate that. Yeah, that's wonderful. I hope so too.
Yeah, I mean it's like I don't know. Obviously, I have no idea, but that's just sort of like I've always leaned more towards the fact that when we die, because I've heard a lot of people say, and not to get too like heady I don't know. This is sort of where the conversation
This
ended
is
up.
the place for it.
But when we die, I feel like I've heard people say that it scares them, like the idea of dying and nothing happening. But that almost comforts me. That comforts me, the
Yeah.
idea of dying and nothing happening, because it's just like eternal, like slumber. It's not even slumber because you don't even know that you're sleeping. When you're sleeping, you're still aware in some sense. So I guess it is still weird in that way. But what scares me more, or not scares me, but like kind of like just gets me thinking, is like the idea of there being a higher power or some sort of weird afterlife, because that freaks me out in the sense that like I have no idea what that's gonna be, and I don't know. It's just interesting, but yeah.
What if I wasn't playing by their rules this whole time? I'm screwed.
Well, that's why I don't believe in a lot of religion, because I can't get behind the fact that there's like a hell and that you could go to hell just because you practice the wrong religion. Like because
Doesn't seem
you
very fair.
yeah, well, just because like whatever your culture was, because really I think all religion is just cultural, and
Yeah.
like it just fits into whatever people believe in their part of the world. But like the idea, that's the main thing, is the idea that you could go to hell because you just weren't born in the right place in the world, is ridiculous. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like a manifestation of cultural morality, but it's interesting then that there's so much overlap. And they talked about that in the film too. Like one guy could be writing one thing on his computer, and in a few other places around the world, the same thing is happening. So there is like an innate human element to all of these pieces that ties it together. And whether it ends up manifesting in holy moments or not,
yeah,
there's always this, I don't know, maybe not between other religions, as you were saying, like one can say you're doing it wrong, the other can say no, you're doing it wrong.
yeah.
But there's still this desire to connect and have community and have a shared understanding.
What's between like their own like packs, or what would the word be? Their own tribes.
Yeah, but I,
Yeah.
I think it broadens outside of that too, because so many of the ideas do overlap. Be a good neighbor, be kind in general, don't do harm, is the base of most religions, in order to better yourself and the world that you live in. And so what's interesting to me is that regardless of where you are, regardless of what you believe, there's these core things that seem to long for like a sort of harmony. Like we all just want to have what makes us happy and have the people that we love have what makes them happy. And so it's like we're all seeking these answers and significance and meaning, in order to have harmony with each other. Like we're all trying to find the shared definition for these words, and it's a little bit off, but there's a lot of overlap. Yeah, it's just fascinating the way that this film does so much with it. It manages to contain all of these different concepts and have so, I don't know, it delves into them so broadly, but still ties it all together through this idea of like, we're all trying to figure this out. Like we're all trying to understand in the last minutes of our lives, or during a dream, or in conversation, even through music, like when the band is kind of trying to convey what they want from each other in terms of sound and then create this harmonious sound they all agree on. It's just lovely, and I think it speaks so much to like Richard Linklater as a person, that these concepts come in over and over again in his films, like these feelings of exploring. I would love to meet him someday and just pick his brain. But yeah, I appreciate the core humanity in it. Like while everybody's kind of approaching it differently, the intention in the approach is the same, which is trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And make the most of it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think it was interesting. Like I love a lot of the ideas that Richard Linklater explores like over and over, and like he also like he's just like, I feel like he's very philosophical, and like even a lot of his movies, even if they're not like super philosophical on the surface, there's like some like ideas in the subtext that are philosophical. And but one time like last year I got to go to Austin and I saw Slacker. It was like the 30th anniversary of Slacker, but they were doing it like a year late because of COVID, because it was supposed to be the year before. But
Sure.
it was at the Paramount Theater, which is a big theater in Austin, and that's mostly like for live events. But they played the movie there, and then Richard Linklater and the whole cast were there in person. So I got to see him in person. I didn't like meet him, but I saw him on stage, and then like a lot of the cast. So that was a really cool experience. Yeah.
I'm definitely very envious. I wish I could have been there. Um, yeah, I hear he's like a pretty approachable person who just like hangs around. I've like mentioned wanting to meet him to a few people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I just talked to him while I was at a theater one time," and I'm like,
Mhm. Well, he has his own theater in Austin. It's not like, I mean, it's kind of his own theater, but it's the Austin Film Society that he's like the head of. So yeah, there's the Austin Film Society Theater, and I've actually never been there, but I went to that Paramount Theater screening, and I also hope to go to the Austin Film Society at some point in the future. Yeah, that
"Yeah,
was really cool.
you have to.
Hmm.
You're so close. You're closer than I am, and I want to go. So
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I
for
go,
sure.
you
I did.
have to."
Yeah, yeah. He does a lot of screenings. Like, I mean, not like a ton, but like definitely like a fair amount of like he'll like do the introductions to certain movies and whatnot. But yeah, I
Mhm.
definitely got to go see something there.
Yeah. Were there any other, I'm just scanning what I jotted down. Were there any other things you wanted to touch on or talk about? I feel like we've had such a nice conversation.
Yeah, for sure. One more thing I wanted to say is that I thought it was
Yeah.
interesting. I watched like a behind the scenes like sort of featurette thing, and I just saw the movie shot in live action because they shot it all on mini DV camera, which is like just like the sort of tape that was like popular at the time, like the early 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
and it's made me think about how, because have you seen a lot of the Dogma movies, like Dogma '95,
Mm-mm.
like the Idiots, like Lars von Trier, Julian Donkey Boy, Harmony Korine. There's a lot of movies shot at
No,
that time.
I haven't seen
Um,
a lot of Von Trier.
Okay. It was just like an idea. It was a sort of a philosophy, quote unquote, or just like a set of rules that you had to follow. Like you couldn't have any sort of like music that was like they wanted like no non-diegetic music, which means no music like outside of the scene. So you could have
Mhm.
music playing within the scene, but you couldn't have music playing outside of the scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And no costumes. And they had all these rules, and a lot of them were shot on mini DV camera. Um, And this movie was shot in mini DV, and it wasn't a part of that, but it just kind of reminded me of that when I saw the footage, like in live action. But I just thought the animation, because at first I wasn't like loving the animation. I thought it was like sort of like really rough around the edges, but as it went on, I got more into it. And then watching the live action footage, I just realized how much better, like 100 times better, the animation made that footage. Like if it was like, I feel like if it was just live action, like nobody would be talking about this movie. But the
Mm.
animation does something to make it like a lot better. Because a lot of the
Yeah.
conversations they have, even though they hit at real ideas and they hit at ideas that are very interesting, when they play out live action in this sort of like very like just real way, that's like not very nice looking, like in terms of cinematography, it seems like sort of ridiculous, but the animation captures something interesting, and I also think it captures the idea of like these sort of weird images you have in your head when you're dreaming. That I think it's great. Like I think the animation was perfect in the end, and it was really good.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It elevates it in a way that I can't imagine it being able to reach through live action. There's little details too. Like I remember some scenes where as he's talking to someone, like their eye color changes a few times. It'll be like blue and then green and then light blue and then teal. And so it's like these kind of elements where it's a little bit out of reality. And I
Mm.
think that helps these concepts kind of gain a little bit of traction because it's hard. You don't want to feel like you're just sitting in a philosophy class, right, with somebody
Mm.
talking at you about these things. And so the animated element makes it more accessible, but it also creates visual aids for what they're talking about. Like I remember at one point a guy is talking about basically, electrons fire in your head and it causes you to move. It's not just a thought. Like there's all of these biological mechanisms that happen for me to be talking with my hands. And they illustrate that, like, you know, there's the brain with little lightning bolts, and then you see the muscle with the, you know, sparks in it. So I think that it helps in that way too. So, you know, maybe people who don't sit around with dusty philosophy tomes in their living room can still feel like they're understanding the concepts. But then it makes it rewatchable too, just because the animations are fun to watch and interesting and very colorful. It engages the eye enough to where your mind can wander. And I think that that's one of the best one of the best elements of the animation, you know?
Yeah, and one thing I thought, some of the animation is like almost like creepy, like their eyes are like bulging out of their heads, and yeah. But I thought it was really good though. I thought it was really interesting, and yeah, in terms of like A Scanner Darkly, I think got very more like much more like photorealistic in terms of just sort of trying to interpret how things looked, but like adding things on top of that. And Apollo 10.5 sort of did the same thing, but like they shot a lot of it on the green screen, I think. So they were adding their own backgrounds, which is interesting. But yeah, with this one, with Waking Life, I liked the animation a lot. The only thing I didn't like, I wouldn't say I didn't like it. It was just like the only small criticism is I didn't like some of the symbols that would pop up. Like they would be talking about neurons or whatever, and they would like just have like symbols floating in the background of what they were talking about. And like, I don't know, I thought a lot of that was like a little bit after school like specialty, but I mean, it was fine though. That's just
Like
the one
clip
criticism.
art?
Sorry.
Was it the design of it, or that it was there? Was it that it looked like clip art a little bit, or was it you just didn't want it there at all?
I mean, a little bit like feeling like clip art, but just like, I don't know, it just felt kind of like childish, and like the way it's kind of trying to like keep it like in our mind's eye, you know what I mean, like keeping it at the forefront. But it was fine though. That's just like one of the like small little things I had to say.
Yeah, I can understand like how it wouldn't land with some people and some people it would. Like I imagine there's a whole section of people who would say that it makes them nauseous or gives them motion sickness because it's always like
There's parts of it where like the whole background is like shifting on like 3 layers, and it's just like shaking back and forth. So I could definitely see getting motion sickness. I almost felt that like a little tiny bit, but yeah, for sure.
I don't get that really. And I felt it a little bit from time to time, like when he's flipping through the TV, and so you get these like very jarring like shifts between like, oh, it's all blue and like a little bit almost like Van Gogh with the brush strokes, and then it cuts and it's like very energetic animation. And so it's your eye is always entertained. Like your eye will never be bored. You might not like what you see, but your eye will never be bored while you watch this. And it's funny too because it makes them into kind of like caricatures. Like I'd be curious to see the live action footage, but like they're exploded out a little bit, like with the big eyes and big teeth and the shapes of their heads. And so maybe not for like in terms of stylistically, maybe not for everybody, but I think it works for what they're trying to do.
I definitely think it works for sure. One thing I thought was cool to see was like there's a small cameo, the part you were talking about on the TV. You could see Steven Soderbergh talking. He like told a story about like he was like Billy Wilder talking to Louis Malle, and like Billy Wilder, because Louis Malle had just made his like most expensive movie, which was $2 million. And Billy Wilder asked him what it was about, and he was like, "It's about a dream within a dream." And then Billy Wilder said, "You just lost $2 million." But that was Steven Soderbergh telling that story.
That's what I was trying to remember earlier in our conversation when we were talking about like how this ties with Slacker. He's like, "Oh, you just lost $2 million." I was like, I wonder if he had like pitched this before and ended up making Slacker or a different movie instead because they're like, that's not going to work. Though I know Slacker was very low budget.
And that was like that was his first feature-length film. Well, technically, I guess it was his second. But his first one was called like You Can't Learn How to Plow Without Reading Books or something like that. But it was all made on his own. And it was just like, it was literally just him as the main actor, filming himself, just like walking, like no dialogue, no nothing. It was pretty much just him traveling around. And I haven't seen the full movie. I watched the full movie with commentary. I've watched the commentary, but I haven't like watched the movie on its own. But one thing that I think is really interesting about Linklater is he always gets me creatively. He gets my creative juices flowing. Just listening to him talk, or watching his movies. I'm always thinking about I'm always impressed by the way he shot things. I was impressed about how he shot this, which was like, if you watch the live action footage, it looks very crappy. You can see boom mics everywhere, but then he translates it into something really cool, and it's just really cool how creatively he thinks, and he always manages to come up with something very interesting on a very small scale. But yeah, I really like him for that reason.
And in these places that would otherwise be completely mundane, he just injects his thoughts and makes it into something so much bigger. I love it. He's one of my favorites, definitely. As we're talking, I'm maybe from top 3 or from top 5 to top 3. Linklater's up there for me. So thoughtful in his projects, and yeah, so accessible. Comfort food, but comfort food that will make you think. I love it.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite filmmakers too. But cool. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. It was a great movie. I give it a 5 out of 5. I'm assuming it would be 5 for you as well.
Well, it's on my top 5 or top 100, so definitely a 5 out of 5 for me. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add. I feel like we definitely if we were chatting over a cup of coffee, I could sit here for hours. But for the context of this, I think it's probably the end of my train of thought. But thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this. I've had such a good time.
Yeah, thanks. Same here. And thanks for being here.
Of course.
But, thank you. Yeah, and thank you everyone for watching. And I'll see you next time. Bye.